But I've heard that. Yeah. Well, maybe, but if he did, it's not recorded. I looked. I tried to find it because I heard it, some time ago, good few years ago. So I tried to locate it, but I couldn't find it. Yeah, well, it's an interesting idea because some people go into coma for decades. For decades. There's this one I read about. He was a famous soccer player, I think. Yeah. And they made a mistake in a simple knee operation. And he went into a coma like 30-something years ago, and he still is there. For a knee operation, nothing, like what you might think could do it. But he's still in coma. It's like 35 years, and his wife still goes, I think, every day and looks after him after 30-something years. Have a look. You can look it up. It's a famous case. It's on the internet. I saw it a few years ago, and then I saw it just in maybe this year, something like that, probably this year. Still going on. Still in coma. Oh, yeah. Really? We should start, right? It's a little over time. Oi, oi. Boy. Mm. This is, yeah, okay. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Gopi Jana Balava Giri Bharadhare Vijana Bala Gopi Jana Balava Giri Bharadhare Jana Balava Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Nandana Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Danandana Raja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachare Tira Vanachare Yamuna Tira Vanachare Tira Vanachare Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Radha Madhava Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Vishnuvad Paramahansa Parivrajakcharis Tadasasi Swad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON's founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Ki Shri Giri Govardhan Ki Sankirtan Yagya Ki Shri Gora Hari Ki Gaur Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 30, Description of Adverse Fruitive Activities. Text 19. Yama Duto Tada Prapto Bimo Sarabasekshano Sa Drishtva Trasta Hridaya Shakrin Mutram Vimunchati Yamaduto Tada Prapto Bimo Sarabasekshano Sadrishtva Trasta Hridaya Shakrin Mutram Vimunchati Yamaduto tada prapto Bhimo sarabhasekshano Sadrishtva trasta hridaya Shakran mutram vimunchati Yamaduto tada prapto Tad Bhimo sarabhasekshano Sadrishtva trasta hridaya Shakran mutram vimunchati Yamaduto tada prapto Bhimo sarabhasekshano Sadrishtva hridaya munchati. Ladies, Yamaduto tada prapto Bhimo sarabhasekshano Trasta hridaya Shakran mutram vimunchati. Duto tata prapto Bhimo sarabhasekshano. Carry on. Vishva Trasta hridaya Shakran mutram vimunchati. Someone else? Yamaduto tada prapto Bhimo sarabhasekshano Sadrishtva trasta hridaya Shakran mutram vimunchati. Yamaduta, two messengers of Yamaraj. Tada, at that time, praptao, arrived, bhimao, terrible, sarabhasa, full of wrath, ikshana, their eyes, sa, he, drishtva, seeing, trasta, frightened, hridaya, his heart, shakrit, stool, mutram, urine, vimunchati, he passes. Translation, at death, he sees the messengers of the Lord of Death come before him, their eyes full of wrath, and in great fear he passes stool and urine. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. There are two kinds of transmigration of a living entity after passing away from the present body. One kind of transmigration is to go to the controller of sinful activities, who is known as Yamaraj, and the other is to go to the higher planets, up to Vaikuntha. Here, Lord Kapila describes how persons engaged in activities of sense gratification to maintain a family are treated by the messengers of Yamaraj called Yamadutas. At the time of death, the Yamadutas become the custodians of those persons who have strongly gratified their senses. They take charge of the dying man and take him to the planet where Yamaraj resides. The conditions there are described in the following verses. Yamadutau tada praptau, bimal sarabhishek shanau, sadrishva trasta hridaya, shakrin mutram vimunchate. At death, he sees the messengers of the Lord of Death come before him, their eyes full of wrath, and in great fear he passes stool and urine. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatyadesh Sri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyas cha kripa sindhubhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Well, devotees, it's getting worse. Every verse is worse than the one before. And it's going to continue like that, I'm afraid. So, really, we have to be careful, because even though we're devotees and we're trying, I take it that we're all basically trying our best to practice sincerely as much as we're able. But you got to watch out. You got to watch out, because, it can get nasty. It can get terribly nasty. And the other day we asked the 3 devotees who appeared to be the youngest what their ages were. What's your age? 30. You're the 4th. Oh no, you're the 3rd. He's 31. But I remember when I joined the temple in London, I was 21. I had turned 21, 4 months before. But someone who was 25 was probably the oldest person in the temple. Really, I would think so. Now, someone 25 is the youngest. We're all moving in a certain direction, I'm afraid. But, as Srila Prabhupada says here, that one kind of transmigration is to go to the controller of sinful activities, who's known as Yamaraj, and the other is to go to the higher planets up to Vaikuntha. Well, up to Vaikuntha, but that's the highest, or it's the highest region at least. Well, even Goloka Vrindavan is sometimes referred to as a Vaikuntha planet. In quality it is, but Goloka is higher than the sort of regular Vaikuntha planets. So those who really sinful. As Prabhupada says, persons engaged in activities of sense gratification to maintain a family. At the time of death, the Yamadutas become the custodians of those persons who have strongly gratified their senses. You know, you're not in that category. You know, it's possible that somewhere in the deeper recesses of the heart or the mind or something, there may be some tendencies in that sort of direction still, despite our practice of Krishna consciousness. Old habits die hard. But otherwise, other than that, everyone's trying, as far as we can see here. Everyone's, particularly those who are on the inside group in this temple, are really trying hard. And that's really nice. So for such people, particularly for devotees, even if the devotees have to take birth again, we understand that Vishnu Dutas take them to the next womb or wherever in between, before the next womb. Vishnu Dutas come. This is particularly, this is describing the person who really is pretty sinful. We read about him, and he's pretty typical of your average person who's just engrossed in material life. Your average resident of Chatsworth, Unit 5. Yeah. Who are sometimes not as bad as many, but still they're not doing well. But for the devotees, it's definitely different. And even for the pious people, it's described that Yamaloka, which we hear is the planet known as Pluto. Anyway, whether that's correct or not, but there's definitely a Yamaloka, the planet of Yamaraj. And we hear that it has a light side and a dark side. A light side and a dark side. The dark side is where Yamaraj, in his form as Yamaraj, is dealing with these people. And we're going to be reading more about them over the next some number of days. But on the light side, he's known as Dharmaraj, which is, well, Yamaraj, Yama means death. Dharma, of course, we know very well in this context, basically religion. So on the light side, on the dark side, these types of people go through hell, literally. And yeah, they really go through most extraordinarily terrible things. But on the light side, people who have lived very piously and done, they've worshipped demigods and performed pious activities like giving charity, performing sacrifices. So they go there to be prepared, because Yamaloka means place of preparation for the next step, the next destination. So those who have been sinful, who are, in very large numbers and proportionately percentage-wise, they tend to be in the great majority. They go to the dark side and they get prepared for lower births. Whereas those who have lived very piously and like that in the mode of goodness, they go to the light side where they are prepared for going higher than where they have been. Yeah. And on the dark side, they get prepared, for example, in many cases, for taking birth as animals, which is lower than what they're used to. But unfortunately, they performed such activities for which the natural results or reactions are to take birth as animals. So now they have to be prepared for that. But they were living as humans, you know, albeit very low-class humans, but still humans. And so they have to be introduced to the way of life that they're going to be going into. So if they're going to be born as a certain type of animal, then they are placed in that type of situation, eating that type of foodstuff and living in that sort of social environment, that sort of social atmosphere that they will be in when they take birth as the whatever type of animal it is. Dogs fighting with each other all the time. And, pigs, classically, Prabhupada was always, I wouldn't say fond of talking about pigs, but he did, just to, clear things up for us. So they have to go through that way of life to prepare themselves. And at first, because they're coming from, some sort of human or at least physically human type of body, so initially it's terrible if they have to eat, different things we don't want to talk about, but they're forced to do that until they get used to it and until they like it. So that when they actually take that birth, they feel, yes, here I am, at home, home at last. Really, that's actually the situation. But what sort of change to go through from the human form of life to that form of life where you actually feel, yes, this is where I belong. I like it. It's my natural sort of situation. So that training period is not nice. It's really not nice. Of course, for those who were humans, because generally speaking, all the acquisition of karma goes on generally only in the human form of life. In the lower species, there's no acquisition of karma. You just receive. Demigods are also humans. They're in the human species. But they're more receiving the results of good karma acquired on this sort of middle level that we're on. So for them, being prepared for that, gosh, very nice. Very nice. But for those who are going down, and they are in the majority, then it's not nice. It's just so much not nice. And I read Srila Prabhupada saying how that the human population on this planet, of course, the vast majority are engaged in really very sinful activities and on a very frequent basis, like all day, every day, or something like that. Prabhupada was saying that if they don't get the association of devotees, then all of them are going to be taking hellish births. All of them will take hellish births if they don't get the association of devotees. So it's really quite a situation. So therefore, for the devotees, it's very important that we really stick at it, particularly us. We're Radharanath senior citizens place, at least many of us. I don't know about the majority, but old age, in one place Prabhupada says old age begins at 50. I think a lot of us are over 50, but in another place, in more places, Prabhupada says it begins at 60. So, yeah. But for anyone, who knows when death will come? Who knows? And I'm sure yesterday, many young people died on this planet. I'm sure many did. And I'm sure many of them died in some unusual circumstances. I mean, like unexpectedly, they died. Just some freak situation, maybe an accident or something like that. Many. So who knows? In one sense, old age means just before you die. And whenever you die, just before that, even if you were only 25 or even if you were only 5, you were old because, at the next step you died. So this poor person, it is terrible. As the previous verse says, he dies most pathetically. Srila Prabhupada here is talking about a man, and we generally find that Prabhupada's style of writing is that when he talks about people doing this and that, in the great majority of cases, he uses the male gender. It's not a bias. It's just a style, sort of, something like that. But don't worry, it applies to ladies too. No less. You can just substitute she or woman, like that. And so they see the Yamadutas. Well, according to the description here, two Yamadutas come. And they're very ghastly looking people, because they're also people. But they're ghastly. They're like you could say, out of some type of horror movie, if you wanted to put it that way. Yeah, because, these horror movies, looking people, sort of zombies or whatever, they're something like visions of hellish situations. Yeah. So the Yamadutas, they're some sorts of ghastly looking people. And the person who sees them, the dying person, as that person sees them, they become shocked. Very, very shocked. And as described here, Shakrit Mutram Vimunchati. And this is not Gomutra. Gomutra is very auspicious. Cow urine. They are so, what does it say? Sa drishtva trasta hridaya. Seeing this, he becomes so frightened. He passes stool and urine. I don't know if any of you have ever been so frightened that it just happened like that. You pass stool or urine. There's a description of, who is it? Of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta debating with some big scholar who was super famous and had a big following and was very proud of it. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta defeated him so strongly in front of many people, and in other words, very embarrassing situation, that at least in the biography it says the person passed stool and urine where he was sitting. But you got to be pretty shocked to do that. I think you got to be really just in another dimension of shock and fear and fright altogether. But that's what happens. That's what happens. That they see the Yamadutas. Their devotees have had experience, you may have heard, doing book distribution. Back in Srila Prabhupada's time, there's one story of a devotee distributing, because what we used to do whenever the latest volume of Srimad Bhagavatam would come out, whether it was the first canto or the third or the sixth, we'd just go out on the street and distribute it. And sometimes people will look and say, oh, sixth canto, where are the other 5 parts? And we'd say, oh, don't worry about it. Because Prabhupada said like that. Don't worry about it. Wherever they read from, it'll help them. But there's a story of a devotee distributing the 6th canto on the street somewhere. And on the back cover is still, I think to this day, a picture of the Yamadutas taking a jamil out of his body. And they look shocking. They look truly ghastly. Or worse, they're absolutely monstrous. And so the devotee is distributing there, and he meets one man who tells him that he had not long before had a near-death experience in some heart failure situation or something, but they revived him, although maybe he was technically dead for some seconds or a minute or whatever. And so this man takes the book, he's standing there, he's just looking at the book and saying, yeah, I had this experience. And he turns to the back cover and the man just went white. And he became stunned. He said, wow, I saw these people. Yeah, I saw these people when he was in that in-between state. But devotees, don't worry too much. As long as you carry on, you must carry on. We absolutely must carry on and not become enamored by, just everything in material life. They say every saint has a past, and for every sinner there can be a future. So We all have our pasts. Let's not relapse, because it could be too dangerous, actually. Anytime if we ever sort of flirt within our minds with some remembrances of what I used to do and what I could have done and so on and so forth, all this sort of thing, we should know we're taking a chance. We're flirting with the possibility of actually being dragged down, because fall down, if one is not careful, it's possible for fall down to happen even just like that, on the spot. Maybe it's more often that a devotee who's trying to practice but really attracted by material life, in many cases it may be like a slower process. Gradually they become more attached, and gradually they become, they start considering, maybe I should actually try again at material life. And then they sort of drift away. But in some cases, it just happens like that. Bang, quickly. So therefore, it's always important to be on guard. I read just day before yesterday or the day before that, Prabhupada was talking about that. Prabhupada was talking about that how it can happen very quickly, and you may not even realize, but suddenly you realize, you've actually become engaged in some activity you shouldn't have been engaged in. So therefore, and Prabhupada was saying there that one should live as if I'm going to die, just like now. Today, or not just today, but actually now. It's said that for a devotee to really be successful in Krishna consciousness, the devotee should think, I am going to die at any moment, and be ready like that. Whereas for a materialist, it's said, it's sort of, in a manner of speaking, but for someone who really wants to get into material life, it's said they should think they're never going to die. They're just going to live forever. Because if they think like that, they won't be frightened of absorbing themselves in material activity, just full steam ahead. If they have some idea that I could die at some point, then there may be a little hesitation. But if they feel, we'll just go on, then they'll be able to get as much as it may be possible to get out of their attempts at material enjoyment, which isn't a lot, but at least it's as much as they could get if they really try their best. But for a devotee should always be thinking that death may come at any moment, and therefore I have to be ready, because one moment it will be. It will actually be. And it may only be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. If you're 25, I don't know, 60 years or something. My mother lived to be 91. So X number of years later. But one moment it will be like that. It'll be that moment where next moment you're going to leave your body. So yes, for the Yamadutas, there is there are sort of different stages. I mean, not for the Yamadutas themselves, but for the conditioned souls. First stage is the Yamadutas take them to Yamaraj. And that is quite something. And we are going to read about that tomorrow and the day after. Yeah, and the day after that. And we're going to be reading it for a while. Next, his limbs are lopped off. Lopped, heavily chopped and torn asunder by elephants. Okay, all right. We'll get there in a few days, don't worry. It's a little taste of the nectar to come. But they're taken. That's a whole thing, being taken to Yamaraj. And then when you're in Yamaraj's hands, that's another thing. And then, if you're due to go to a hellish planet, then that's really another thing, because you stay there a long time. And there's some, I was reading actually this morning, that, well, it's the next verse. You get given a super body. You get given a super body. It's a type of subtle body. It's a type of subtle body which can't die. Can't die. Some of these people who suffer a lot, they commit suicide or they want to be euthanized. I mean, there's a whole thing going on in many countries now about the right to die. The right to die if, your life just feels like that. But in this case, you don't have the right to die. But you're given a very sensitive body within which there's just so much pain, but you can't die, even if you want to. Just sort of put an end to it all. You just can't. Yeah. So, it's extreme. It's very extreme. It's too extreme. So we must practice our Krishna consciousness very, very seriously and remain focused on the Lord. Even though sometimes challenges may come, they will come. But we have to remain focused on Krishna, focused in devotional service, and keep our eyes away. Sort of, not just eyes, but keep our vision away from material existence. There's the biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which you might not be familiar with, but the problem, so that the Gomorrah was the city which was to be destroyed because it was so sinful. And people were given warning they could escape, but they weren't allowed to look back. If you looked back, you turned into a pillar of salt. That's worse than turning into a pumpkin, right? Sleeping Beauty or whatever it was. You turn into a pillar of salt. So this one person, I forget all the details, but he looked back and he turned into a pillar of salt. Maybe it's metaphorical, but the principle is there. Don't look back. Keep going forward in Krishna consciousness. Don't look back. Hare Krishna. Any comment or question? Yes. Yes.
By Yamaraj, not take anyone.
Uh-huh.
So I'm wondering what are the qualifications needs to qualify for
For
going by Yamaraj or
okay. So the question is from the 6th canto, the story of Ajamil. The Yamadutas wanted to take him, but the Vishnu Dutas stopped them because Ajamil, even though he was very bad, but he chanted the holy names of the Lord. Well, yeah. So the Yamadutas went back to Yamaraj and asked, what's going on? And he told them, I think you should check. I'm not entirely sure if it really says that if someone's just got tulsi beads. I mean, there's definitely certain qualifications, and maybe it's just having tulsi beads, is included, but I have a feeling it's more than just wearing tulsi beads. But, that should be checked because it's an interesting point, and it's an important point. We should, if it's really like that, we should sell a lot of tulsi beads. Start a whole thing, tulsi bead revolution. As I recall, it's more like people who are actually like devotees, which, includes, of course, wearing tulsi beads. But the main thing is the state of mind, the consciousness. If a person is just, like a dog, and they got tulsi beads on, I don't know if it's quite that simple. It's an interesting point. Maybe they'll be born as a dog at a temple. Maybe. But the main thing is the state of consciousness. The main thing is the state of consciousness. Actually, the main thing ultimately is the way of life the person has had. That's the main thing. That, it's not just necessarily that someone who lived a rotten life, but at the time of death somehow they just chant, or someone by them just chants Hare Krishna, and they leave the body, and then they just go back to Godhead. It's more because, in so many cases, for people to die, unless the body's smacked, like in a car accident or explosion or something, where it's just like literally from 1 second to the next, from life to like full life to total death. In most cases, it takes time for people to die of natural causes. Yeah, and they go into a semi-conscious state. We've had our number of devotees here who have passed away here in the temple. And as I understand, it's like that. It takes some hours. And then you notice, oh, they're gone. So therefore, and Prabhupada talks about that. Actually, the context, one context in which Prabhupada talks about that is Mahatma Gandhi being killed. He was shot. And they say that when he was shot, the actual impact, he called out the name of Ram. But he only, as I understand, he only died some hours later. He didn't just, it's not like in the movies, bang, oh, no, you're dead. Like in war, unless people who are shot, normally they die of loss of blood after some time. They're lying there, they're incapacitated, but they're alive. So Prabhupada talks about that. The main thing is really the lifestyle. The lifestyle. If a person has really lived as a devotee and really tried their best to practice, then by Krishna's grace, even though they're going to lapse into a semi-conscious and finally more or less unconscious state, but Krishna will help them because they're devotees. And therefore, the Yamadutas are told not to take the devotees. And maybe those who have tulsi beads, let's do a check. But it's more how the person has really lived and what sort of person they really are than just some sort of tricking death by putting on tulsi beads. Depends on the consciousness which has been cultivated during the years during a person's life. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.